Okay, here we go, and good morning. So what today we're going to cover are some of the stuff that I left out for yesterday's course, and this is going to be a lot of stuff you're going to use for problem solving, for modeling and such. So it's a lot of random subjects. So the first one we're going to cover today is something called transform type-in, which is basically a numerical value that you can pull up when you create a mesh that helps you either scale and move it according to some sort of a numerical value. So I'll kind of show you how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and right to the center and create a sphere. No, that's not a sphere, sorry, that's a box. I'll create a sphere. And then let's say that I want to scale this box. Normally when you scale it, you would, of course, press space to lock it, and then you can scale it like this. But what if you want to scale it specifically to a certain kind of value, like a 92%, 150%? So all you would have to do is, if you go right up here to where your scale is, uniform scale, if you right click it, you're going to have a window that's going to go ahead and pop up like this. So these are going to give you values where you can scale your mesh either by percentage wise, either entirely or as in one axis. So if, for example, if I drag this up, as you can see, it's starting to stretch it like this. If I drag it in this direction, start to take it into the y-axis and then upwards. And then for percentage wise, if you like, if you go and say 120%, that has officially scaled your mesh 120%, and then resets to the value, because once it's been scaled to 120%, then that's the new 100% and such. So that's transform type-in. That could be useful, for example, if you want to do, like, for example, a series of meshes you could that have to scale accordingly. You could do like 10%, 10%, 10% more until you get all meshes to kind of have that alineation of scale, so from one size to another. So you can find other uses for it, but it's something that's very useful and such. And then in that same way, if you want to move your mesh, again, if you go to move select, right click again, transform type-in, you could do the same here, move it in X, Y, or C. And for example, this could be actually very useful if you're animating something. So I like to use it if I want to keep the distance that a character is animating. I can offset where the first I would call that, sorry, where the first keyframe is, and then have it be where it goes 20% from keyframe 1 to 2. So it's something that you could use for consistency and purposes and such. So it's maybe mildly useful, but we'll see. So, okay, so once you have actually went and scaled your mesh, then you're going to go see that your mesh is, the scale of it, is the factor is going to be off. So let's go to scale. So if you see my mesh here, if you look at these values right here, as you can see, right there, 120, that means that your mesh, the scale of your mesh is 120%, which means, like, for example, if you bring this into a Unity or some sort of other game editor, the scale could kind of give you problems, because, for example, if a programmer wants to scale every item in the game because they want to do some sort of shrinking potion and they want to scale everything by 10%, that 120% value is going to affect your object and how it works. And the same way that you have a scale down here in these transform values, and it should always be 100%. If you go to rotation, as you can see right now, it's not being affected, but if I go ahead and rotate like this and then just let it be, as you can see, the original resting scale is 140. Doesn't make much of a difference, of course, when the character is a sphere like this, but if you need a character to point in a certain direction, and the rotation is off like 180, when you import it into the game, this value right here, since it's not to 0, can sort of give you problems. And that's the same for movement, of course. Doesn't matter as much, but in this case, it's right down at, as you can see, it's not exactly in the center. So what I'm going to do is show you how to move that, or how to scale these to 0 if you like. So if you see these little values here, if you can see how they move like that, if you just hover right over it and right click it, it resets the value to 0. Right click resets the value to 0, and then right click resets the value to 0. So this tool that I'm going to showing you now is one of the most important things that you're going to need for exporting objects into the game and also working with 3D Studio Max, because it helps solve a lot of problems, and that's called the Transform Xform. And it's called the Reset Xform, and what the Reset Xform does, it resets all the movement, well, not the movement at least, because it'll make just the movement just 0, 0 for wherever it is, but at least for rotation of the object and the scale of the object, it's going to rescale it to 100%. So if you can see, it's 120 right now. So if you go up to the top menu right here, all the way where they have this little hammer right there, utilities, click on that, and you see this value right here, reset Xform, it's already set. If I hit reset selected, as you can see, the value has already been reset and such. So that means and if you go to the rotation again, the rotation's been set to 0. So every time you create anything that's going to go in a game engine that you're going to have to skin and rig, I would recommend you always reset the transform, because if you go too far, for example, and you rig a character and the scale is off, you just can't scale that character with a rig attached to it and such. So it's one of these important things that you need to have on your checklist whenever you work, because it'll avoid you a lot of problems. So you mentioned mirroring, and I'm going to show you one problem that goes with mirroring, which is sometimes when you, well, just go ahead and demonstrate and show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go take this, and as you can see, it has the cage where the Xform has been reset. So I right click, and then I collapse all, and then I just hit yes. And then now I'm at editable mesh. I prefer mostly working with editable poly, so I'll just do that, although I don't know how much of a use it's going to be here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and maximize my viewport, and I am going to go to the top. And I'm going to delete half of these polygons here. So the next important thing is going to be that we're going to use is how to mess with the pivot point and such. So I'll kind of give you a demonstration how that works. If you go right up here where they say, what is that? What is it called? Hierarchy. This is where you can change the pivot of your object and such. And you can move it into a different location. So let's say, for example, I want to take this mesh right here, and I want to put it here, and I want to take this mesh and copy it over so it kind of rotates and make a circle when I copy it. So what I would do is I would go Effect Pivot Only, and when you press Effect Pivot Only, if you go to Move here, it just moves the pivot of your object. So if I want to be precise in this way, I'm going to press S, and I'm going to snap it, and then I'm going to put it right to the center, and I can see from the transfer type in, it's already 0, 0, 0, so it's the right location. So then if I turn Effect Pivot Only off, and take my item and then hold, how do you close this? Oh, sorry. And then if I take it and I hold Shift, as you can see now, it's going to be rotating along the position of this pivot. So I'm going to hit cancel on that, and let's say we want to make it specific. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on Angle Snap, and then when I go ahead and hit Shift, 90%, and then when I make a copy of that, as you can see, an option menu comes up, clone options, and like I said yesterday, instance is so you could actually have objects that are, whenever you take the main object and you edit it, these instances are going to also equally change as well in the same way as the original until you collapse it, or reference, where you could actually go and edit the instances themselves independent and then have that affect the original object. But in this occasion, I just want to have the copy, and what I'm looking for right here is the number of copies. And what it's going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select 3 because I want to kind of move it and go all around. And then when I do that, as you can see, now your mesh has been copied along that one single pivot that you can still see right there. And that's something you could use useful for, of course. Sorry, let me think of another context for that. So let's say I'm taking all these meshes, put them here, and then put it here, and then put them here. As you can see, that's the original right there, so that takes the pivot of the object. So right there, and I'm kind of being a little rough with this. Boom, good. So then I want to take these items, and I'm going to go ahead and attach them, and then I'm going to go ahead and reset the pivot so it sits in the center. So if you look in my menu here, they have this something called attach. If you do attach like this, you click and you attach whatever you like. And if you do this one right here, attach list, it brings up a list of all your items in your scene, and you can click on it and then attaches it. So now that I have these objects attached as one object, I want to go ahead and change the pivot and have it be where it's more or less in the center. So again, I go back to hierarchies, and when I do Effect Pivot Only, if you put center to object, that's where aligned allows you to align it precisely in the center of wherever your item is. So if you have a lot of items that are sort of chaotic, it's going to calculate a place in the center where it's going to do it, and that's where it's going to put your pivot at. So that's important right there. So one problem that you're probably going to encounter is when you do mirroring, is that you're going to need to, sometimes when you mirror an object to create a copy of it, it actually takes all of your faces and flips them inwards. And you have to, this is to work through to be able to fix that issue, because it's something that's going to come up in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and create a sphere right in the center, modify and make it an editable poly. And then I'll go to polygon, delete the ones that I don't want. delete. Zoom in, make sure I get all of them, delete. Okay. So now that that's done, I'm happy with it. So I'm going to go ahead and take it and go like this and make a copy. So yeah, no name. Okay, that's cool. That's my copy. And sometimes when you make a copy, let me see if the problem shows up this time. Okay. All right. Well, sometimes when you make a copy, or let me see if it did it to the other one. 1 second. Sorry. Duke. Okay. Sometimes when you make a copy of an item and you've been working for a long time, what it actually does is it takes all of these faces right here and it flips them. And can you see how the shading changed when I did that? Flip. So let's say if you were to turn the sub-object on this and then render it, as you can see, that's not rendering correctly because all the polygons have been flipped inwards. So the fix to be able to get that to work, and hopefully it should work at least if I did this manually, if you go and reset Xform, reset selected, as you can see the shading has changed. And that means if I go here and collapse, when I go press 4 and then go to poly mode, as you can see, since it's a more brighter tone of red, it means that they have been flipped to the right orientation. So the problem you probably had with your sword is you probably had some sort of issue to being able to attach these together so they sort of fit and you can weld them together. So how do you do that? So you're going to take your original mesh and go ahead and hit attach, boom, and then you're going to have to go ahead and select. Yeah, okay. So now the problem that you have that you've attached these, you obviously have holes in your mesh. And how do you see your holes in a mesh whenever you want it to be entirely clean? You just, again, you go into your border, and if you see your border, as you can see, that line means that these are holes in the meshes. So this is something you're going to have to do, use the border option if you want to make sure your mesh is completely enclosed. So to be able to weld this, how is it we're going to do this? Let's see. So one option is to go right into the top view. And if you press 1 and you go to vertice, and this is mostly the one I use for because edges, it can sometimes be hard to see when I've done it all, but with this it sort of works better. So I always go with vertices and then I hold shift and then I make sure that all of them are selected, which as you can see they are. And then if you see this menu right here, the welding option is going to give you a specific preset value. So if I go ahead and click on weld like this, it probably did the weld, but I want to show you how it goes wrong so you know what to fix. So if you can see when you hit on the little right value of weld, if you raise the threshold, it starts to take more of the mesh. It starts to weld everything in between. So normally when I want to have it where I just want the vertices to weld in place, I'll give it a very low value like 004, hit OK. And then if you can see the result before is 514 and then afterwards 482. So that means that it's giving you the amount of the tries that are being removed in this process. And then when you click OK, and then you go back to border again, select, as you can see, all the vertices have been welded and you have a closed mesh. So that's probably something you're probably going to need to use whenever you work on your sword and such. So the next one I'm going to show you sort of the display window, which is if you go to right here, this little TV thing, display, this is where it gives you a way to be able to hide and unhide things that you like. So for example, if you have, let's say you create a lot of cameras in the scene, if you go to this part, if you just click hide cameras like this, then it'll hide all the cameras in the scene. And let me show you if I do it, for example, for geometry, that means every single bit of geometry in your scene is going to be hidden. So like this, if you, for example, if you have bones, if you click on helpers, that'll hide your bones. Or if you do geometry, it'll hide the geometry. Or you could just go right here, right down where it says hide, and you could either do hide selected, which is by clicking. If you do hide by name, when you do hide selected, it hides the one that's selected. If you do hide by name, it'll give you a list like this, just like the sort of display one you have, and you can choose what to hide and unhide based on whatever category. But in this occasion, I'd take this one, and then it would hide it. And then the other one is hide by hit, and that's if you have a lot of items, you just go click, and it'll hide everything once that's activated and such. So that's one. And then the next one, if you want to have an item in you're seeing that's there, but you can't affect it. You can't accidentally touch it and move it. You do freeze selected. And what freeze selected does is, as you can see, you freeze the item. You can't touch it. You can't scale it. So that's something you can leave there for reference if you need it. And then if you do unfreeze all, you'll get to have your mesh to be able to, again, to touch it and play with it and such. Display properties, you can show this right here. It has a lot of different options in terms of how to display your mesh. Backface cull, the trajectory, for example, if something is animated, vertex, edges only, you get to see all the little splits between the polygons and such. Where was that? See-through. And vertex colors. If you have vertex colors for anything, you could use that for painting textures. This would be the place where you display those sort of features and such. So let's see. So that's some of the important ones. You're going to need to be able to hide stuff, to take your pivot, to reset your X form of the scale and rotation of your item. So now we're going to go with some modifiers to show you what these modifiers are capable of. So let's say you have two meshes like this. That's a copy. And for some reason, you want to be able to still have the ability to have these two meshes be as separate objects, but still you want to still be able to edit both of them at the same time without actually attaching them to each other. So how do you do that? So what you do is if you can hit Control, you select both of them, and if you go to your modifier window here, and then you put down your drop down, just like they had before, when you collapse your mesh, you have editable mesh, editable patch, and editable poly. And so what this does is that I've applied basically an editable poly modifier over these two meshes. So that means, for example, if I go click here individually and I alter this, I can change it like this. I can change it like this, of course, and move it and do whatever I want. Or then if I click on both of them, I can still hit vertex like this, select both of them like that, and edit both of them at the same time. And then after you're done editing them and you don't want to still have them to be as one mesh, you just go and collapse it. And then like that, when you click at the meshes, they're each individual. And so like that, you are able to change 2, 3, 4, as many meshes as you want at the same time without attaching them. And like that, you can avoid issues like accidentally welding stuff together, like deleting stuff on accident on one mesh. If you could just go and delete it, you can keep the changes to one mesh and then delete the modifier in the other. So it's one that's handy for modifying stuff when you don't want it to be so messy and such. So then the other one is going to be that if you're going to want to take your mesh, and I showed you a version of this in Blender before called Lattice, where if you want to go and take your mesh and alter it over a whole instead of starting to mess with all of the individual vertices, it's a modifier that you could add. So if you scroll down here, they have FFD2, FFD3, and FFD4, and this is called freeform deformation. And when you add it on, it creates a mesh that fits over your initial mesh. And when you go down like this, bring down the menu, you go to control points, then you can choose one of these points here, for example, and it's going to move every single vertex that is affected within that area. So if you want to go and do some funky sort of scaling on your mesh without having to do it individually and do every single row at a time for consistency, this is what you would do. So this one right here, oh, sorry. So how do you close this? Fuck it. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to close. Oh, there we go. Cool. So this one right here, FFD222, means that you have 2 by 2.
Sorry, I think the screen sharing stopped.
Oh, sorry. Let me go ahead and do that. Yes. You see. Cancel. Okay. See, this is how I go in this. How do I do this? Nah, there we go. Sorry. Okay. How about now? Is it good?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, so anyway, back to, I probably have to go over it again. So when you add this modifier, when you get the control points, and every time you take a control point and you raise it up, as you can see, it moves the mesh through every single place where the control point is active in. So if you want to do some funky extrusions with this, for example, if I want to take this and just go ahead and, like for example, if you want to make an egg, instead of going and scaling all the all the different options on the egg, if I just select these top 4 right here and then I lock it and then I scale it, then that's how you can then uniform scale everything so you don't have to go and mess it with everything individually. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So the option between those, which is, as you can see, where are you? FFD 2, 3, and 4 means that these have preset values in terms of having these control points at every axis. And then you can't change these. However, if you want to do it on your own where you get to decide how much is on your freeform deformation, you can decide it. You just go to FFD box. And then if you see the number of points, if you go here, and it's best to decide these before you actually edit something because it could get a little bit messy. So let's say in this occasion, I want to do 6 by 3 by 2. And then when you hit OK, as you can see, then the control points change whatever you decide on. So this, for example, is something good to do if you want to do organic shapes, if you want to take something and fold it and sort of rotate it and adjust it, because let's say, for example, if I go and I expand this control point and I select all the top ones right here, no, take off lock, you can take it and then move it. See, I missed one. No, I accidentally got too many. So I'm going to go ahead and unclick this one. And then if I take this, I can go take that mesh and expand it and distort it like this. And then you could actually, the same way you can take it, you could also rotate it, scale it, or just move it however you like. So this is something that you could use very handy to change the shape of shapes and have it be where you don't have to go to the individual level and edit these out with the vertices and such. So let's see. All right, this is another one. This is pretty useful if you want to optimize things. For the most part, when it comes to games, I recommend for you, for example, to optimize your items by hand, because if you're going to have some sort of unwrap to it, you could actually destroy it with an automatic unwrap or optimize. But some occasions, sometimes if you want to do some sort of random shapes, I like to optimize it. So if I want to do, for example, like a rock, I will go take a sphere like this and scale it, and then I will go down, and the first one that you could use for optimization is called multi-res, which is right up here, multi-res. And what multi-res is once you generate it, it basically takes your whole mesh, and then after that you could actually go and start to optimize it based on a numeric value. So right now it's meant to shows that vert percentage is at 100%. And that means that if I start to scale it, that means that you start to reduce the polys in the mesh by percentage. So as you can see like this, I start to scale it like this, a little bit more. So then if I take that and I optimize it a little bit more, and then then I collapse that, yes. And then I go into editable poly. And then if I want to make it more rock-like, then I would take this whole smooth surface right here. I would go down to my smoothing groups. And as you can see, you already have a ready-made rock. And then when you have a ready-made rock like this, you could then go and you can take, for example, a freeform deformation. So let's go ahead and get 3 and 3. And in this case, I am going to take some of these points and reduce them. Maybe take my rock and rotate it a little bit more. And so that's right there is one way where you can take an object and optimize it and then use it to model quick little things like this. For rocks, for example, it's really nice, and you can go and cut shapes into it, and that actually works really nice. And let's see what else. Another way to optimize, so let's go ahead and delete that. And let's see, maybe I have, no, I just could use a sphere, that's easier. If I use a sphere, then I'm going to raise the amounts of segments in it so it's more complicated. So another method to be able to do that is another modifier, and it's this one is just called optimize. And I don't know the difference between how these work, to be honest. But my observation is the percentage one for me has been better and I get cleaner meshes. So this one I don't use, but it's an option. And as you can see, as you can start taking down the percentage of the raising up the face threshold, it starts to slowly optimize it by percentage. And you can take it where it's almost into to nothing. So it's a good way to create random items, but for the most part, I really wouldn't recommend it for optimization of anything that needs to have a proper unwrap and such. And so it's one of those things that you could probably use it for rocks, or just, for example, I've used it before where I've worked on film projects where I get some sort of scanned 3D object, and it'll be like 11 million polygons. Like on the last project I worked on, I got one 3D scan of Nikolai Coster-Waldau, the guy from Game of Thrones. And I had to take that 8 million poly model and bring it down to about 5,000 tries. So that's where I would use something like multi-res, where like that, it's already set as it is. And then when I go to multi-res and then I start playing around with the percentages, and then that gives me sort of a way to be able to optimize huge items and such. And then afterwards save it where you can work with them and such. So let's see, what else? And then the other one is one you're going to be used when you'll see me use it extensively when I do my little demonstration on high poly modeling, and that's going to be the turbo smooth one. So if I take again, let's go ahead, I do a box, create a box, yes. And as you can see, if I don't do any cuts, it's going to give me funky results. So I'll do some a few like this, cool. And then if I do edit poly, and then I find turbo smooth, as you can see the result, it's giving me initial smoothing, and this is going to be the main tool right here that you're going to be using to add turbo smooth to your model. So obviously when I do the tutorial when it comes to how to do something high poly and such, this is what you're going to be using. So yes, and then if you go right here, for example, and you raise up the iterations, it starts to bring the try count, but at some point it just becomes ridiculous and such. And then isoline display is the way to show it a little bit more simply if you want to be able to work with the mesh and such, because ideally what people do is when they do this is they go back here to down to the editable poly, and then they'll just go and take some of these and then move them and rotate them, and then after whatever, and then when you go back up, then you can see the changes sort of added to it. But again, the same lesson that I told you yesterday, when you're going to work with something that has modifiers, the best thing is get whatever you want done, and after it's done, you go and then you collapse it into editable poly, and then you add the next modifier to whatever you need it to be and such. So let's see, is there anything else? Let me go ahead and look, sorry, probably should be more prepared for this. And no, I believe that is it for right now. At least that's some of the stuff that you're probably going to have to use at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, and then we'll go from there. So function 10.